Hey, what's up you guys? This is Rob from The Gay Guy Plays, and today DE scores a home run when we take a look at the Dojo palette. Okay, so I'm quite excited about this palette due to the fact that it does an awesome job of filling in some of the holes we currently have in our color selection. It's one of those things that have been driving me crazy for a while, mainly because we have so many colors, yet we still somehow manage to have gaps that we need to fill. And I know that sounds like I'm talking about my personal life, but I'm not. Well, I am, but I digress. This palette offers a wide variety of colors, each shade starting off quite dark and muted and slowly gaining clarity as they shift to the right. Now, to save myself some time of having to explain it in each and every row, in general, the first three tones on the left make great accent tones, while the last three tones tend to be the cleanest and make for some awesome energy colors. Now, as with all standard palettes, you can pick this one up under the equipment tab in the market for 75 plat. Now, the first row starts off with this gradient of periwinkle. It's very familiar as you can find similar tones in other palettes like the Lotus and Classic. However, in comparison, this version tends to be a little less saturated and leans a bit more blue than blue-violet. The next shade is a much needed yellow-green. All of the greens that we've had in the past have either leaned too green, like those in the Grenier palette, or too yellow, like those in the Gamma palette. Even at its brightest, it still retains its tonality. Moving down the line, our next shade is this amazing yellow-based brown. At its lightest, it finishes off as a soft cream tone. While it shares some similarity to the Twilight palette, you definitely won't find this tone anywhere else. Now next on the list is a blue with the slightest teensy tiny touch of green. Now the interesting thing about this one is how drastic the gradient is on it, with its darkest being a rich gem tone and its lightest being a gorgeously soft sky blue. Alrighty, this next row by far is not my favorite. It's a fairly standard eyesore of a blue. I did look for dupes of it out there, and while there are a few that share the same tone, this one is a bit more muted, making it slightly less annoying. Now the next shade is a very washed out forest green, with yet another drastic gradient that at its lightest turns into this amazing pale mint. Now if you've got the Gamma palette, you'll find a very similar row, however it won't go as pale as this one does. The next row is a fairly balanced green that quickly turns into this out of control fluorescent. Definitely not my taste, but it's also definitely not found in any other palette, so if you like it, pick it up here. Now onto this gorgeous rich red. You don't notice it much at its deeper tones, but it does have a touch of orange into it. If you use its brightest as an energy color, it'll actually read more orange than red. This is reminiscent of the super muted brick red in the Storm palette, but at this saturation, it's a palette exclusive. Next is a mustard yellow we've seen several variations of before. This is almost dead on the same gradient as a Storm palette. However, if you don't have that one, it is one of my favorite shade ranges. The next gradient is possibly one of my favorites. It's this soft creamy beige. Every tone in this row is extremely usable. While there are a few similar shades in the Twilight and Xmas palettes, I find them all to be too saturated to use. For a slightly greener version of this gradient, take a look in the Storm palette. Okay, so we get back into the super saturated with this next row of purples. As you can probably tell, I hate it. However, after a bit of digging, this is the only version of this tone that exists at this specific saturation, being just a touch more muted than the rest. The same goes for this next row of blues. It's a teensy bit warmer than the previous eyesore blue, however it is still too saturated for my taste. But if you like it, you won't find it anywhere else but here. Next up is this gorgeous row of balanced reds. This one I am a big fan of. However, if you're a palette junkie, I'm sure you could easily find dupes of each of these shades from the Valentine's, Red, White, and Blue, and Xmas palettes. Next is this fantastic teal. It starts off as a gorgeous deep gem tone and lightens up into a solid teal that's bright, but not obnoxiously bright. Now, as much as I like it, if you've got the Gamma palette, you've got some pretty solid dupes for this one. Otherwise, I'd consider it an exclusive. Moving on, we have yet another version of this balanced blue. Why? Because sometimes we need to take the good with the bad. However, I will admit that the two on the far right are actually kind of pretty and are definitely usable. Now we're back to the teals. This version starts off considerably lighter and has a bit more green to it. Now, you can almost dupe this gradient with the Grenier palette, however, that version does lean even greener than this one does. Finally, the last two rows are some much needed oranges. All of the oranges we currently have are either too saturated, or if they're muted, they end up looking more like browns. These gradients are a bit more subdued, but at all points in time always look orange. Personally, I like the first two on the left on the top row, and the last two on the right on the bottom row. Now with that out of the way, let's get dressed. So all in all, I think the Dojo palette is an extremely strong choice for someone who has the basics and is looking for something with a wide array of usable accent colors. They have muted tones as well as tones with a good amount of pop. The only thing that you'll find truly lacking in this are the extreme basics like off-whites, grays, and near blacks. However, there are already several palettes out there that have that covered. And as for all the palette junkies out there are some definite must-have shades that you won't find anywhere else. I'm in love with both sets of creams, the smoky teals, forest greens, muted oranges, and that awesome yellow green. This palette has a ton of exclusives and several shades that are definitely to die for. So thank you all for watching another episode of Dress to Kill. If you haven't caught it, be sure to check out one of my most highly requested videos on customizing primes for the new Void, as well as the entire Dress to Kill playlist. Now, don't forget to do all the things that I ask you to do at the end of every one of these, and as always, stay drop dead gorgeous.
Hey, keep your eyes off my nuts.
So adorable, mildly obsessed with nuts, and not afraid to go down on someone. It's like a match made in heaven, isn't it?